What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns with you on Mike McCarthy Day at Hallis Hall. This thing has turned in the last 48 hours with the Cowboys moving on from Mike McCarthy. They couldn't come to terms on a contract, and very quickly, we knew last week the Bears wanted to talk to him. Jerry Jones said
no,
and now he legally can't because his contract is up. So we're going to talk about some Mike McCarthy in this. We're also going to talk Joe Brady. Johns, how you doing?
You're leaving out Arthur Smith.
We're going to talk Joe Brady, and we're going to talk Mike McCarthy.
You don't want to talk about the offensive coordinator who struggled in his playoff game this year for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
So on CHGO today, as we record this on Wednesday, I've put all these coaching candidates into buckets. And I have a bucket that's called no thanks. Arthur Smith is in that bucket.
Okay.
So I'll tease that right now. Where I put Mike McCarthy, I'm a little confused on, to be honest with you. So maybe a little bit later on in this podcast, Jon Machota from The Athletic and One Star Cowboys podcast can help us figure that out. But should we jump right in?
Let's do it.
First of all, quick promo. I mean, all the coverage right now between the two of us on Johnsy and Kevin on The Athletic, theathletic.com/Hoge Jahns. Make sure you're reading and checking all that out. And then on CHGO, our coaching tracker, I promise you, just an easy way to follow everything going on. There's a calendar on there. You can see where all the interviews and how they're playing out. Write-ups on every single candidate, and then some diehard content for you too on there as well for all the CHGO diehards. So go check that out as well. It's all chgo.com/coaching search. Outstanding resource for just following everything. And all of our merch is up at hoganjahns.com as always. So before we get to the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy talk, we wanted to highlight the Bills a little bit. They have a huge game this weekend, obviously, against the Ravens. And Joe Buscaglia, who's joined us many times on this show, has insight on Joe Brady, the Bills offensive coordinator, hot name, or as Mark Potash would say on this podcast, hot guy.
It's a hot guy.
Joe Brady, hot guy, 35 years old. And one of the more intriguing, maybe riskier candidates that the Bears might be looking at. So let's go ahead and bring in Joe, who covers the Bills for The Athletic, Joe Buscaglia, back to the program. All right, let's bring Joe Buscaglia back to Hoge and Jahns. Always good to have you on, Joe. The hair on this show, I don't think has ever looked better than it does right now.
It's pretty elite. It's an elite day on this Wednesday in January.
And that's why Kevin Fishbane is not joining the show today.
Oh, man. Another hair shot.
Wow.
Fishbane.
Wow.
Hey, you're setting me up for these.
He's not even here to defend himself.
It's horrible.
But he'll listen. The best part about this is his friends listen to the show, and they will text them immediately when this comes up. Which is you got to keep him on his toes here a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Joe, so what's it like covering a team that is now always in the playoffs and has an MVP candidate for a quarterback? What's that like?
It has been a wild journey to this point. They've won 5 straight division titles. This year's was not even close as compared to last year's ones. And this was the year that they were supposed to take the mini step back that a lot of people were thinking. And then the division was just so terrible that the Bills just took it and ran with it. But it's definitely a crazy thing to cover. There are a lot of things that, I haven't really encountered before with a team like this one. This is my 15th year on the beat. My first 7 was just drought. They were mired in a decade plus playoff drought. And then finally they broke it in Sean McDermott's first year. It ended at 17 years, which is wild to think about. And now they've been in the playoffs 7 of 8 Sean McDermott years. They've been to the divisional round of the playoffs at least in their last 5 playoff journeys here. And now they're trying to get back to the AFC title game for the first time since 2020. So the 2020 season, I should say. So it's definitely wild times here in Buffalo, and the expectations around here have certainly raised. And it's kind of funny to think that way because people are just like, oh my God, just get in the playoffs one time for the longest time. And now it's like, okay, when are you getting to the Super Bowl? When are you going to win the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I imagine that pressure is kind of mounting right now. We obviously brought you on to talk some coaches, but since you're here, and it's obviously the best game of the weekend, I think. I mean, what are the vibes right now? This is, the line has already switched over to the Ravens, despite being the road team, and I guess it's not terribly surprising when you consider like how that first matchup this season went, albeit it was in Baltimore.
Yeah, and when you watch Baltimore on film, you don't see a lot of weaknesses, which is wild. Like they have pretty much everything sewed up about them. The one thing that I will say that kind of makes a big difference, I think, in this matchup, as opposed to the one where the Bills lost by 25, and that's the only time they've lost by more than 3 points this season, mind you, in a game that mattered, I should say. They were without 3 of their starting defenders in that game, including both of their starting linebackers, which is vitally important to, as you guys well know, when I came on and talked about Tremaine Edmonds and his importance to what the Bills did. They didn't have Matt Milano. They didn't have Terrell Bernard either in that game. They didn't have their starting nickel corner, Taron Johnson, who's one of the best in the league at doing that. And that's basically their entire second level of defense against the Ravens run defense. And they lost their starting safety, Taylor Rapp, midway through that game. So there's at least like some sense of, okay, well, the defense is going to stand up a bit better this time around as opposed to last time around. Plus, it's in Buffalo. The Bills haven't lost here this year. So there is that element to it, but I just don't know how you defend Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry down in, down out. Like you're going to get them some plays, but they're also going to get you their fair share of plays. I think it's going to be an absolute score fest. I can't wait. I hope weather doesn't ruin it in terms of being a scoring showdown, but from what I've seen so far, from projecting out to Sunday, seems like it's going to be really cold. And maybe not super windy, maybe a couple flurries, but that might be an advantage in itself for the Bills because they're used to it, and maybe the Ravens aren't.
So here in Chicago, we love to see a score fest because this is Joe Brady versus Todd Monken. That's how we're looking at this one. Tell us about Joe Brady. It wasn't that long ago where he was an assistant coach. He wasn't the offensive coordinator. So maybe take us through his rise to this place where now he's this 35-year-old coach getting head coaching interviews.
Yeah, they brought him in to be the quarterback's coach after Ken Dorsey got promoted to be the offensive coordinator after Brian Daboll left to go be the head coach of the New York Giants. Dorsey, in his first year, really struggled. And they were trying to figure out who they were. His creativity was lacking. It just seemed like it was a constant question, but he was Josh's guy, which is part of the reason why he got the job. I would estimate, because the franchise quarterback's opinion goes a long way here. Then in the middle of his second season, it was just the offense was totally hit or miss. Like they put up a bunch of yards and stats, but it was just so disjointed. There was just something missing. The creativity from Daboll wasn't there. It just seemed like they were running a lot of the same offense from when Daboll was here, but without that little spark of like ingenuity from game to game. And it got to the point where Josh Allen was looking like a shell of himself, both in interviews and on the field, where it was just completely up and down, that they fired Ken Dorsey after a loss to the Broncos middle of the year last year. So they promoted from within. They firmly believe in that for the most part, unless they need a total change in something. And that's when Joe Brady came to his position. And it was a breath of fresh air for that entire offense, because Dorsey, he was really well liked, but I think he was very not stubborn, but he was very stuck in wanting to run the concepts that he wanted to run. Joe Brady is more of a player's coach, where he will go and talk to every single player on the offense, ask him what plays they like to run, go and diagnose things from practice and really take that feedback and then sculpt his game plan for the upcoming matchup around what the players are feeling heading into that game. Now, it wouldn't be all of that, because he has to show some signs of who he is too, And that has been the biggest difference between Dorsey and Joe Brady, just how invested the offensive players feel in the offense based on what he calls and how he operates with them. Very well liked. The other thing he really did was he really took the concept from Sean McDermott, where McDermott likes to have the threat to run, is how he's always termed it. And he's took that and run with it. They've helped develop their offensive line to be one of the best in the league with offensive line coach Aaron Kromer, and certainly Joe Brady deserves some credit for that too. Their run game is one of the most efficient in the league this year with James Cook. Like they have really found something that has worked even when Josh Allen isn't at his best, like he wasn't early on in the game against the Broncos. So all of these different things where they've got balance, they've got investment from the players, they've got players, hitting their ceiling outcomes based on their season. Like that's the reason why he has rose to prominence here, and why I think the Bills would be very sad to see him go.
So I think I have two big questions when it comes to Joe Brady, and one I'm not sure you can answer because it really has to do with what happened in Carolina, right? So it's great he's having all the success with Josh Allen, who's superhuman right now. But it's like, well, what happened though when you had Sam Darnold in Carolina? Because Sam Darnold just, did what he did in Minnesota with different coaching. But the other one, which also might not be the easiest question to answer, but he's 35. He's still pretty inexperienced in the league. Like, I think it's only 7 years in the league total, including 2 under Sean Payton a while ago, which was, certainly counts for something. But just, you got to be more than an offensive mind. You have to be a head coach if you're going to be a head coach. And what do you know about him on that side of things? Or is that still a question in your mind, like how he would lead an entire team?
Yeah, that is still a question in my mind. I mean, we have not all we have gotten from him is a year and a half. Granted, it's been a really good year and a half, but to your point, like this is a team operated by one of the best 2 quarterbacks in the league this year. And he deserves some credit for that, but it's not as though Josh Allen was a project when Joe Brady took over. That's what made Brian Daboll such an intriguing candidate. And he's been there, done that. He's grizzled, has all these principles, this, that, and the other. But with Joe Brady, it's kind of a projection more than anything. I mean, to a certain point, all head coaching candidates are a projection if they've never done it before. But I think Brady in this case is a bit more of a projection because you don't know how he's going to be that CEO. You don't know how, because you can hire offensive minds to be the head coach until you're blue in the face. But if they don't know how to establish a building, if they don't know how to establish, and this is a super buzzy term and very often cliche, but a culture, because it's true. Like if you have a program that basically runs itself by the time you get to year 5, then you are usually a successful head coach. But if you are someone that's more of a micromanager and you have to rest on the laurels of your offensive or defensive play calling, then it's probably not going to go as well. And every situation is different too. So it really is a projection at this point. He's a well-liked guy. He's got some fire to him that he shows in practices. He's pretty well-mannered outside of practices, and he's extremely well-liked. But is that enough to lead a building when things go awry? Because he's not the one that people turn to, completely here in Buffalo when that stuff happens. That's Sean McDermott, and McDermott's done a great job of changing himself throughout the years and becoming this exactly what this version of the Bills needs. But that's, again, a projection on Joe Brady. And I don't know what happened in Carolina with your other question. Matt Rule, I think needing somebody to fire, I think is probably, and these things happen, as you guys know, that's what probably springs to mind more than anything, because I think Brady is bright. I think he has some really unique concepts. He does know how to get the most out of his players. But is that head coach material? I guess some team will find out whenever they do hire him, if they do hire him.
As someone who covered, both play callers, how do you think, do you think Daboll's struggles in New York hurt, Brady's candidacy? And where does Josh Allen, I guess, how prominent, say you're interviewing Joe Brady, where do you separate the Josh Allen brilliance and what Joe Brady wants to do? Especially with the day ball things happening in New York.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because what Brian Dable had going on for him is the fact that he helped sculpt Josh Allen. And I will say, early on of his Giants tenure is what I expected out of him. I think where they got themselves into trouble is doing a bit too much of seeing is believing with Daniel Jones, giving him that contract. And that, I think that basically tanked the rest of it, because I still think Dable is a brilliant offensive mind. I still think Joe Schoen is a really good talent evaluator. It's one of those things where you make a crucial error like that. And as soon as they did that, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I would have done that. But they made the playoffs and people were riding high in New York. So I guess to your question, where do you separate Brady from Allen? I think you can also factor in the Ken Dorsey factor here, because Ken Dorsey had a blank slate in front of him. They said, okay, you are Josh's handpicked guy. You are the person that we think can lead into this offense. And, there was a lot of buzz around him for a long time. I think he even got I can't remember. I think he even got some like head coach mentions after his first year, which I was kind of blown away by. But that said, him flailing the way he did in his second year and Joe Brady taking and running it with it in a limited playbook, mind you, because he couldn't establish the principles he wanted to when he took over in week 9 or week 10 or whatever it was last year. So that goes a long way. And that Josh Allen that he first got last year is a much different person in terms of how he's approaching game in, game out, how light he is, how loose he is, how free he's playing. I mean, look at Josh Allen's stats. This year, he is not even coming close to throwing as many turnover-worthy plays as he has at any point in his career. And how much of that is Josh Allen coming to that, or versus how much of it is Joe Brady kind of reinforcing that it's okay to take the small stuff. It's okay to take the small stuff. We'll get him on the next play. We're just setting up the entire time. So Allen is playing the best football of his career. How much do you attribute that to Allen? How much do you attribute that to Brady? I think it's probably a bit of like a 75-25 towards Allen, if I had to guess, but still Brady does deserve some credit here. But again, that goes to the exact question. Is that enough to say, okay, you're going to be the head coach of a team. You're going to run a program now. It's very young into his career. So
yeah. What about Sean McDermott's role in all this? Like, so, I mean, you develop coaches underneath you, we talk coaching trees all the time. I feel like Sean McDermott doesn't get talked a lot about, when it comes to that type of thing. Like when people talk about Brian Dable, they don't talk about like what he learned under Sean McDermott. If anything, it's like what he did at Alabama under Nick Saban. Like, so but what type of things does like McDermott do, or his role in all this? He's run an outstanding program in Buffalo that would rub off on some of these candidates, even if they are offensive guys, which McDermott is not.
Yeah, McDermott, to his credit, ever since he came around, I mean, after the first like year and a half, I'd say, when he started to get a little bit comfortable and started to establish that buzzword culture that we've been talking about, he's been really good with helping develop his staff and doing whatever it is they want to do. So if they have head coach intentions, I remember back with Dable, he would bring him into meetings. He would go through all of these different steps with him about, interview circuits and things of that nature. And Dable had been through it before, but not to the degree that McDermott had. And I think that helped certainly. But the reason why I don't think Dable and McDermott get talked about together a bunch is because McDermott trusted Dable unilaterally to go and just run the offense. And that takes a certain amount to it as well. So McDermott does play a strong role. And I'm of the belief that, a couple of years down the line, we're going to be talking about their defensive coordinator, Bobby Babich, as a potential head coaching candidate, because even though they're not having the best defensive season, impressive guy, he has been under McDermott throughout the entire duration of his Bills tenure. He started off, as a positional coach. They moved him around to different positions to give him more experience. They upgraded him to defensive coordinator. He's done really well. He's a motivator, all of that. But it's because McDermott sees the potential in these guys, and he wants to put them in the best chance to succeed. So I do think he deserves some credit here, and seeing that potential out of Joe Brady too, I think deserves some credit too, because they could have gone outside of the building and tried to do something a little different, or they could have gone with someone who is a bit more experienced. They have a couple of different offensive coaches on their staff that have experience as a coordinator in Aaron Kromer and Rob Boris. Could have done either of those, but he didn't. He went with Joe Brady because even though Carolina failed the way that it did, believed in the person, believed in the concepts, believed in the relationships within the building. And so I think that's to Sean's credit. He understands people and he understands how to connect with people.
Aaron Kromer, we know him quite well here in
yeah.
Chicago. Former Bears offensive coordinator, former anonymous source for a national report. I guess the last question I have for you, Joe, is just like to compare him to Ben Johnson, who has pulled himself out of like head coaching searches just because maybe he wasn't ready. Certain teams weren't what he was looking for. What does Joe Brady want? Like, is he ready? Pete Carroll is 73. Joe Brady is 35, which, I mean, talking about a generational gap. I mean, that is something for the Bears to get through. So I guess, do you think Joe Brady is ready? And what do you think he's looking for in a team?
I think he wants to be a head coach. Whether or not he's ready, I don't know that. I don't even know if he knows that, to be perfectly honest. He has been in a successful organization as in a prime position for a year and a half. And that's not that much time to kind of base something off of. So whether he's ready or not, I do think that there's some questions there. And, I'm sure as we go on, if he doesn't get hired somewhere and we get a sense of what he's doing, what he's become in the background, you kind of get the feeling. You guys know, you're in a building, you know when coordinators have that kind of it factor. I just don't know yet on Joe Brady, but he's an impressive guy because of how he's helped develop this offense to just put up points like gangbusters, because they're averaging over 30, and their top snapped wide receiver from this past game was Mac Hollins. Like, what are you doing there? But they've been really stinking good, and the offensive line has flourished with him in control. And to your point with the generation gap, he's 35. He probably has a easier time of connecting with newer generations than say a Pete Carroll would. So he does have that going for him too. The best case I can make for Joe Brady is extremely well liked, creative guy, creative concepts, has a good feel for the team and knows how to connect with his players. But is that enough to establish, that force, that head coach force that sometimes you need? I guess we'll see.
Well, we always appreciate the insight, Joe. It's been great stuff. I find Brady to be one of the more intriguing but sort of risky candidates that the Bears might be talking to here. But hey, enjoy some playoff football this weekend. I don't know what that's like, but I'm excited to watch the game. It's going to be great.
Yeah, as soon as we knew that the Bills were going to move on past the Broncos, all of us reporters looked at each other like, "Oh, this is definitely the Sunday 6:30 game." There's no doubt. There's no doubt in our minds. But yeah, it's going to be incredible to watch, and we'll see if the Bills can actually move past the divisional round for the first time since the 2020 season, and getting as good of a shot to do it at home. And and the last time they made it to the AFC Championship game, they beat the Ravens to get there. So we shall see.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
you,
guys.
Joe. Adam, I don't know about you, but there were a lot of times during that conversation with Joe, just listening to him, where I envisioned Matt Nagy, where you had this young offensive coordinator with some charismatic traits, gets along with his players, has played a role in the success of a quarterback. Matt Nagy was with Alex Smith. But then, you're struggling to separate him from, the success of his team. Like, with the Bills and Brady, it's Josh Allen. with the Chiefs and Matt Nagy, it was, well, Andy Reid. Was Andy Reid's place in all of this success? Both young coaches. I don't know. I don't know if that's a fair comparison, but that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, no, there's, there's a lot of that. And honestly, you can apply even some of that to Ben Johnson in some cases. I do like that Joe Brady has, been calling the offense. That's one difference. But
yes.
Yeah, I worry about the lack of experience there as well when it comes to Joe Brady. Then we go to the opposite side of the spectrum, Johns. We talk about a guy who's been a head coach in this league for 18 years, has been in the NFL for 30 years, 31 years, I think it is now. And that's Mike McCarthy, who, as we're recording this on Wednesday, January 15th, is interviewing with the Bears today. And kind of a completely different discussion, two ends of the spectrum here in terms of head coaching candidates. So for this part of the podcast, we bring in Jon Machota, who covers the Cowboys for The Athletic. All right, well, we go from Joe Brady to some Mike McCarthy talk, who's in the building, supposedly, reportedly, at House Hall in
might
person.
be.
Yeah. I mean, who knows the way that they're doing these things, but
maybe they're bringing him in the building to talk over Zoom.
The way this has gone, I wouldn't completely rule that out, but well, regardless, I think Mike McCarthy might actually be a serious candidate here for the Chicago Bears, which is why we got to bring in Jon Machota, who covers the Cowboys for The Athletic and also has a podcast called One Star Cowboys Podcast. John, thanks so much for jumping on with us today because, we really need your insight to figure out what we make of the guy that pounded the Bears for years up in Green Bay, but seemingly everyone just wants to always get rid of him. Mike McCarthy. What's up, John?
Not much. Thanks for having me on. It's an exciting topic there.
So can you just take us through, you don't have to say every detail, but what the heck happened in Dallas? Seriously, he's their coach all the way until the very end. Jerry Jones has backed him all the way to the very end. Can you just take us through how things transpired?
I mean, you really have to go back almost a year ago to today, to that loss to Green Bay in the wild card round. Everything lined up perfectly for the Cowboys. They were the 2 seed. They were riding a 16-game home winning streak, the best in the NFL. And they get the 7 seed Packers, McCarthy's former team, favored by a touchdown. This should be take care of business, move on to the next round. See if for the 3rd consecutive year, can they finally get past the San Francisco 49ers? That was all the focus, 3 consecutive 12-win seasons. Niners keep standing in the way. Is this finally the year they get past it? And they don't just lose to the Packers. They get destroyed. I mean, it's 27-0 late in the first half, and it didn't get much better after that. And you can easily make the argument it's the worst loss in Cowboys history. And so you could have fired Mike McCarthy, right? And the reason I say that, by the way, I love, it's one of my favorite things to debate with anybody, because anytime I do, people bring up these losses that the Cowboys have had in the playoffs where Romo fumbled a snap or they lost on this play. They were destroyed. It wasn't even a contest. It was embarrassing. So that's the reason why. And then you also factor in how good that Cowboys team was. Cowboys fans love to just act like there's just never any talent, and that's the reason that they don't go. No, that was not the case, especially with that team a year ago. So for them to fall short like that's been in Jerry Jones' mind from the moment he left his owner's box after that game. Training camp just brings it up on his own and during a walk-off interview after the main press conference is over about how that Green Bay loss is still in his mind. He could have moved on from Mike after that loss. And while some people have said, hey, he had 3 12-win seasons, you could understand it. And he didn't. But he also didn't help Mike at all either. He was basically like, I'm going to let Mike coach out that final year of his deal. But we're not doing anything in free agency. All they did in free agency, they gave a 1-year deal to Ezekiel Elliott. They gave a 1-year deal to Eric Kendricks. That's all that happened in the March-April window of when other teams are adding pieces in free agency. It was very clear from that point that they weren't going to do a lot to help Mike. It was kind of like Jerry was going to be like, Mike, I think you're a great coach. I'm not really doing much to improve this team. Let's see what you got. And I think even throughout this season, it was going off the tracks from the very beginning. You can make the case there was definitely residual effects from that Green Bay loss. Again, 16 home wins in a row over 2 seasons. Nope, that's not easy to do. Not in a league of parity where when you have a good season, the following season, you get a tougher schedule. To do that over 16 games, crazy impressive. This season, they couldn't do anything at home. They're getting blown out by the Saints. I mean, just destroyed 5-6 home games in a row. There's obviously residual effect off that Green Bay loss. And then the fact that they didn't do a ton to improve the team in the offseason. So Mike was not given a great chance to succeed. And like I said, things were going off the tracks, but I think that Jerry held out hope. You know, that fairy tale of they can somehow back into the playoffs and they get hot at the right time. And then he keeps Mike. And ultimately that didn't end up happening. And so I think that Jerry had interest in bringing Mike back, but it wouldn't have been any longer than a 1 or 2 year deal. And Mike would not have any interest in that. There's also was some talk about what about the possibility of keeping Mike, but hiring an offensive coordinator. Mike wouldn't have been cool with that either. He had said a couple of times the last couple of years that he had regrets about when he took the job. He was giving Kellen Moore as the OC. Now he said that at the time he was fine with it, but obviously he wanted the job, so he was going to probably say that at the time. So that's one thing too. So for Chicago purposes or any other team going forward, I don't see him being a guy that would be cool with hiring OC. He'll want to call the offense. And the issue, and the reason I bring that up is because anybody that watched the Cowboys would tell you that things were just starting to get stale. You know, Mike runs a very West Coast offense, and when you got all your guys and it's humming, it's effective, but it just really lacks creativity in a league where not only are you seeing more creative offenses, those more creative offenses are the teams that are still playing right now.
So a lot.
Sorry, that was a lot. I apologize.
No, it was a lot there, but it's a good summary of
Cowboys
why.
are a lot.
Yeah. No, it's a good summary of why this is, I think, a confusing candidate because, I mean, you brought up 16 home wins in a row, 3 straight 12 wins. I mean, the Bears. That's not even like they can't even translate that in their brain, winning 12 straight games 3 years in a row.
And by the way, and that's again in a league of parity where when you have a good season, which obviously you have to win 12 games, next year's schedule is not going to be any cakewalk. So to do that, and also the Cowboys, it's not like they do that every year. So that was when he did that 3 years in a row. That was just the first 2 years when he did it. That was the first time that they did back-to-back 12-win seasons since Barry Switzer, since the Jimmy Johnson, since the early 90s glory days. So none of the coaches in between the glory years of 95 and before, up until Mike McCarthy got there, ever even had back-to-back 10-win seasons or 12-win seasons. So to do it 3 years in a row with the Cowboys, that did say a lot.
So let me just ask you this straight up. I mean, is he still a good head coach? Should the Bears hire him?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I don't know who it'll come down to for them, but I certainly think he should be in the consideration. And obviously with my job right now, it entails a lot of looking at who the candidates are out there. And for where the Bears are, by the way, I'm from Detroit. I've been living down here for about 15 years, but I follow the Lions, the NFC North pretty close. And I just feel like where the Bears are at, I feel like he should be one of the finalists for the job because I don't see the Bears at a spot right now where it's, well, they make this right head coaching hire. And then next year they'll be right where the Lions, Vikings were this year and Packers. I think that they have a year or two that you need some stabilizing there, especially with having a young quarterback like Caleb. And I think he would be great for that situation. The one thing I will say though, is if you want no part of West Coast principles in your offense or with Caleb Williams, then it's probably not a great idea. Cause like I said, I think he's going to want to call the plays, but as a stabilizer and as somebody, he certainly knows how to run an organization. And if he can deal with Jerry Jones on a day-to-day and win 12 games, I certainly think he can do it with an owner who is not going to be anywhere close to being as hands-on as Jerry was.
Since I have questions about Mike, but since you brought up Detroit and you're from Detroit, how much interest do you think the Cowboys would have in Ben Johnson? Because we here in Chicago think he's at the top of the Bears list just in terms of candidates.
With Jerry Jones as the owner, very little. It's just fascinating that, you guys have probably seen those Forbes lists come out every year and the Cowboys are at the top, 10 billion, 10.1 billion, the valuation, everyone always talks about it. They don't spend like a team that's the wealthiest franchise in all of sports. They don't spend that way on coaches at all. I mean, Mike McCarthy on this last year was making around $8 million. And you guys know the top coaches are making close to $20 million. And so they're not going to do that. And I think that's what Ben Johnson is going to want. Also, Jerry Jones at 82 years old. I really feel like the Cowboys are going to lean towards somebody that already has previous NFL head coaching experience. But now after Jerry, or if somebody else was in charge of the team, I think Ben Johnson would be at the top of the list. I mean, I don't know how you can see what he did for Jared Goff's career. I mean, the fact that you had to attach a first-round pick to Jared Goff to get the Lions to take him. Dak is obviously same draft class as Jared Goff. As bad as Dak has ever been, you were never going to have to attach a first-round pick to get anybody to take Dak Prescott off your hands. Now, maybe now with the $60 million contract, but his lows have never, Jared Goff's highs have been higher than Dak Prescott, but his lows have never been as low as where Goff was. And so for Ben Johnson to do that, same thing with if the Bears with Caleb Williams, I think that's very intriguing what he did with Jared Goff and with that offense. And so if you're willing to spend the money like all these NFL teams should be willing to do, I don't see any reason why Ben Johnson isn't number one.
Yeah. Just, you got me stuck on the offensive styles a little bit because, I would probably prefer Ben Johnson's scheme, like personally, with what he's done with Jared Goff, more under center play action. That's not Caleb Williams though. Like Caleb Williams, I feel like, is much more comfortable in the shotgun, and he looks up to Aaron Rodgers. He grew up like literally watching Mike McCarthy's offense in Green Bay. So it's that part of it's fascinating. But we also went through a West Coast offense with Matt Nagy that didn't go very well either. So I
guess the best way I could say it though, I think Mike keeps you on. It's going to be real solid. You're going to be a good team. Like I think if Mike was their coach this year, I think they would have won 2 or 3 more games. With Ben Johnson, I think the ceiling is a lot higher, but there's also the chance because he's never been a head coach that maybe him and Caleb 6 weeks into the season aren't on the same page. Things are starting to fray, things like that, where the basement might be a little bit lower with Ben Johnson than it would be with Mike McCarthy. But to swing big and to swing to turn the thing around quickly and be where the offenses are going in the league, I think Ben Johnson makes a lot more sense there. But I just think that Mike McCarthy he would be real steady across the board.
Kind of going off that, how did you see him connect with Dak, connect with some of the star players in the Cowboys locker room? I think, how did Micah Parsons describe it? He described the firing as what, devastating? Is that the right word? So in the locker room, I guess, how is this viewed, this Cowboys news and how did McCarthy connect with everyone?
The best way I can describe it is, so I've only covered 2 head coaches. It's just been Jason Garrett and Mike McCarthy. Jason Garrett was a guy that, pregame, throwing around the football, like former player, going to Duke basketball games with Witten and Romo and DeMarco Murray, being one of the guys. Mike McCarthy was not like that. Mike McCarthy is the head coach, but he isn't trying to be buddy with the guys. Like you can just tell that he's a very seasoned, experienced head coach. And I'm not saying one way is right or the other, to be honest with you, because if I'm Jason Garrett, I was probably doing the same thing that he did at that time. First time as a head coach, obviously was close with Romo because he had been, an offensive play caller before that and all that. But I'm just saying with Mike McCarthy, he just carried himself as more of a CEO coach, and didn't get into all that, that little back and forth stuff, which I guess I kind of thought might happen because of the fact of just before he takes the job, you had heard all that stuff about like, yeah, it just wasn't great with him and Rodgers at the end, the way that they parted ways. I always make the joke about how there's that famous clip of Aaron Rodgers looking over to McCarthy on the sideline during that one game and mouthing stupid effing call back to back. And I'm always like, if that happens here, it is just it's going to own the sports page the next day all across the world. And it never did. And now Dak, I believe I know him a lot better than Aaron Rodgers. I think Dak's a lot easier to get along with than Aaron Rodgers. So it's hard to make that comparison. So I don't know how Mike would necessarily get along with Caleb. I think it would be fine. I don't know of any players that have really had a disdain or dislike for Mike, but I just don't see him as also the guy that's going to try and be like your buddy all the time and be around and everything like that. But, there's still things where, Dak Prescott had a charity event right before the season started. And Mike McCarthy went there with his wife and he bid on one of the items that were up for auction, and it was over $100,000. I mean, it was we were told not to report at the time, but he's not the coach anymore, so I can share this stuff. But it was interesting to see. Like, you could tell that I saw them build a bond throughout their time together. Like, they were never not close, but as they went on, you could tell they got closer and closer. Because Mike's big on this whole, like, if you have a Sunday game, Thursdays, he always meets with the quarterback, and they always have these meetings, and he did it with Rodgers and stuff like that. Yeah. And a lot of it wasn't really even about football. It was about life and things like that. But there was obviously football stuff in there as well. So basically what I'm saying is he'll connect with Caleb. I mean, that won't be an issue. But he's just not going to be a guy that's like, I'm trying to think of a good example right now. Like, he's not gonna be like Dan Campbell, he's not gonna be like that. He's not gonna be real fiery and doing that stuff. He's never gonna get in like a player's face on the sideline or anything like that. That's not his style at all.
Yeah. But he also, I'm picturing those quarterback meetings going a lot differently than the ones they were showing on Hard Knocks between Matt Eberflus and Caleb Williams back in August. No, those meetings with Rodgers are kind of famous. I mean, even when things got bad and kind of icy at the end. I mean, Rodgers has still been on record saying that he misses those talks that he had with Rodgers all the time about life and all, or with McCarthy about life and all that stuff. The last thing I have for you, though, is the one thing I cannot get over when I think about Mike McCarthy, because we've seen a lot of him over the years, obviously here in Chicago. And it seemed like he was always under fire for this in Dallas, too. And it's very relevant to how this Bears season just went. And that is the game management and the clock management stuff. Is it really as bad as it always seemed to be? Because it just seemed like even when the Cowboys were winning 12 games, that he was under fire for clock management, game management, and those types of things, or was that kind of blown out of proportion?
Certainly anything with the Cowboys is going to get to that level, no question. If you have one clock management issue in 17 games, people will bring that one up all the time. So there is that, but I think there is some truth to that. And I think it's also because of the fact that when you're the offensive play caller, you got a lot going on. And so I think that some of that stuff could have been a factor a little bit. The one that everyone goes back to is a couple years ago in the NFC divisional round. No, actually, no, I think it was the wild card round it was at home. It was the wild card round against the Niners. Mm-hmm. They just didn't handle the last minute very well. And it ended with Dak sliding, and then they didn't spot the ball at the right time. And they're trying to down it, and clock runs out, and they don't even get a chance to throw, a pass to the end zone to even try and win the game. And so there's moments like that for sure. There's going to be some issues like that. With that being said, I mean, obviously nothing like the Bears Thanksgiving game. Like nothing on that level. I know it's a low bar, but I'm just saying, nothing that was ever to there.
That bad, huh?
Yeah, no, nothing on that level. But there were definitely some times I think that has to be a factor in, that a big thing when he was hired was a lot of the, when he left the Packers was about focusing more on getting more analytics into his game. And that was like a big part of a piece that they did on NFL Network after he had left. And I never thought of him as a big analytics guy. That Cowboys obviously have an analytics department, and he took that into account. But Mike always came off to me as a coach that was going to coach with feel for the game and his experience coaching, as opposed to being the analytical guy that maybe a Ben Johnson would be.
John, we have a surprise for you.
Producer Kent here with a question for Father Jon Machota. John, should the Cowboys bring in either Matt Eberflus, Matt Nagy, one of these former Bears coaches during their search?
Wow.
How'd you feel about that?
For the head coach?
Or anything. Yeah. Defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, head coach.
Okay. So defensive coordinator, I wouldn't have a problem with Matt Eberflus. Like, I thought Matt Eberflus, I really liked Matt when he was with the Cowboys he was linebackers coach / he was obviously calling the defense and things like that towards the end. But I thought he was a really good defensive coach, and I thought he would have more success with the Bears. So that was a little surprising for me. So yeah, I don't think that would be bad, but I don't see any way that would be a good idea for either of them to be the next head coach. And I say that, and the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys ended up being someone like Ron Rivera, and it's not going to be like that much more impressive or something like that. But yeah, I don't think for a head coach that would make a lot of sense.
Schemes would line up there. Ron Rivera is head coach. Flus is the DC. That would line up.
I feel like pretty strong that Flus is going to get a strong look at DC. regardless of who the head coach is. But
I mean, I cover the Cowboys. I mean, there's a chance that the next head coach is Jason Witten. I mean, it's not a great chance, but I mean, these are the things that you can't completely rule out here. So I will say this. I feel like the Bears are in a much better position that when all the dust settles and everyone has made their head coaching hires, as of today, I feel pretty confident that the Bears will have done better than the Cowboys did.
Well, the Cowboys can't talk to Ben Johnson or like Aaron Glenn till like they're eliminated, right, from the postseason.
Right.
So, who would you put on? Question for you, you too, Kent, since you guys have worked together so closely, you and John. Like, who is on your candidate shortlist for the Cowboys?
Realistic or
realistic? Yes.
John, go first.
Yeah, if it was my pick, it would be Ben Johnson would be number one. But the realistic one, Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, especially if they were to go and go to the Super Bowl and have a great game plan that beats the Rams and then the Lions or whoever they play in the NFC Championship game, and then they play well in the Super Bowl. I think Kellen Moore would be pretty high on that list. But I do have some. I go back to Jerry being 82 years old. I just really feel like it's going to be a former head coach, and so that's where you go back to the Pete Carroll, Ron Rivera. I mean, you can't even 100% rule out Doug Peterson, because it's anybody that, like, if anybody's won a Super Bowl, like Jerry loves that. Like Jerry will be so entertained by that, and that's also why you couldn't count out Mike Tomlin if they were to part ways in Pittsburgh. I don't know that that's going to happen, but the former head coach is, I think, where they'll go. But if they go the coordinator route, I would say the leader in the clubhouse is Kellen Moore.
Yeah, you can't rule out the total Jerry move of bringing in a guy like Jason Witten. I would even consider Kellen Moore kind of a Jerry move, kind of a guy that'll, go the Jerry way, personality wise, I should say. Dion fits into that, I think, even though he is outlandish. Jason Witten would be like a Jerry guy, but I feel really strongly about either Doug Peterson or John Gruden.
It'd be interesting to tie that in together. I was thinking about this yesterday. You can't, even with the Cowboys, rule out one of these deals where if Pete Carroll, let's say, is not getting any interest from anybody else because of his age, obviously being I think he's 73. You can't rule out the possibility of Jerry trying to work out something where he hires Pete Carroll, but Pete Carroll has to have Jason Witten on his staff as the head coach in waiting, like you've seen in college before. So it's like Pete's the coach on a 2-3 year deal or whatever. Witten's on the staff, and then Witten takes over in 3 years, that it's already agreed upon beforehand. Because I do think that Jerry, 10 years ago, Witten would be more in play than now, but I just don't think Jerry at his age, spending $60 million a year on Dak, spending on CD, spending on what he's going to spend on Micah Parsons, I don't think he's going to want a coach that's never even coached in college or pro. But man, that Pete Carroll age thing, you just can't rule out some wacky thing like that no other team would do.
Kent, you've produced this show, our show, for a long time. If the Bears hired Mike McCarthy, one, how long do you think he'd last here? Two, how much would you join our show to criticize him?
Well, count me in if you ever need any of that going forward, if they make the hire. We talked about this on our Cowboys show when the discussion a couple weeks ago was about Mike leaving. I mentioned the Bears as a possibility and just the level of expectation. And to John's point earlier, I don't think Mike's a bad football coach. I just think he wasn't what the Cowboys need right now. He might be exactly what the Bears need right now. And the comparison I made on our show was, if the Bears could split, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if the Bears could split next year with the Vikings and the Lions and Packers, and split the year after that and become part of the conversation in the division, I think that would do gangbusters in the fan base. I think everyone would be really excited, regardless of playoff success, all of that. If they're a part of the conversation and the way this division's going, I think that is like a more achievable thing for Mike McCarthy than him bringing a Super Bowl to the Cowboys, right? So I think it'd be a good move. I think he'd keep the train on the tracks. The Cowboys were never really bad when he was here, even though this year they obviously the record didn't show that, but like They gave some fight towards the end, enough fight to where there was a rumor about keeping him. So no one ever really hated Mike along the way. There was never really any huge dissension except for like a little bit during the pandemic times when he first got here. But people liked Mike. Mike liked being here. It just didn't work out. It wasn't what they were looking for. But
it's fascinating though, Ken, from the Mike McCarthy perspective. If he was to get the Bears job, you go from the Packers, who are owned by the fans, and so you don't really have anybody on a day-to-day. Then you go to Jerry Jones, which is the most impactful day-to-day, to then George McCaskey, where is McCarthy going with him to maybe umpire a softball game here or there? Like, you don't really,
but
like,
here's
it's all over the place, you know?
Yeah, but here's what'll be different if he comes to the Bears is Ryan Poles.
That's
and
true.
having a GM that's willing to go do stuff and say, what do you need? What does our offense need? I've got draft picks.
But would Ryan Poles do that?
Money?
Because like in Green Bay, Mike would talk about how like Ted Thompson, like, I don't know, it was like kind of like Ted did his own thing. Mike didn't really have a big say in a lot of that stuff. And they kind of went that way. So, and then both programs were drafted and developed, didn't do a lot in free agency. So that is an interesting point. I wonder how it would be with Ryan Poles, because I do think that they would do more in free agency than those other two teams did that Mike's been with. Do you guys think that way?
I mean, yes. It's kind of a mixture, but I think they want to be draft and develop. They just don't draft well enough. So
players never develop.
Yeah, well, I think it's an old cycle where they every time there's a new GM, it's we're going to draft and develop, and then they don't quite do it well enough, and so then they spend a bunch of money and they put themselves in a bad cap spot. But right now they're healthy, so maybe McCarthy kind of having been a coach in those types of systems and doing a pretty good job, I think, of developing, players would help the Bears.
What do you think about, John? I guess this is for you, Mike's ability to develop quarterbacks, because these guys have talked for years about how important just development of the quarterback. Can we get the quarterback right? Once we know who the guy is, then we can move forward. I think you're probably still in that phase with Caleb about, getting him to that place where everybody feels like he's going to get the fifth year option is going to be picked up. Do you think Mike's the guy to develop Caleb, or is Ben Johnson more like along those lines?
I mean, I would lean towards Ben Johnson just because it's a lot more unpredictable. But like I said, I think they could be some real high highs, but some real low lows, where I think with McCarthy, it would be real steady. And I do think he's a good developer of quarterbacks. I don't want to ding him for Trey Lance not really given much, because I think Trey Lance kind of is what Trey Lance is. And I don't think that Lance was put in a great situation to begin with, but just look at what the Cowboys were able to do when they didn't have Dak, and the way they were able to win games with Cooper Rush, I thought that was really telling for Mike. And obviously he's won some big games in Green Bay with guys like Matt Flynn at quarterback. And so, I mean, I thought he did a good job with Dak. Dak was runner up for MVP last year. I mean, he had an outstanding season. And so, I do think he would be good there. And I just think that he's seen so much stuff that's happened. And so I just don't think there'd be a lot that would happen that he wouldn't be able to kind of be a calming force for Caleb Williams, whereas not to say that Ben Johnson couldn't do it. We just don't know because he hasn't been a head coach.
We got to wrap up here. Kent, you want to keep John around for this or
John can leave. I just wanted to
see you, John.
Right. See you, John. Thank you so much. We'll be following all your Cowboys coverage and the coaches search over there. But in all seriousness, thanks for jumping on with us. It's a good conversation about Mike McCarthy that we definitely needed.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Love you, John.
Jon Machota. And of course, Kent and John worked together in the past too, so they know each other well.
For many years, a decade plus. Me covering the Cowboys, and then we actually do that pod together, One Star Cowboys Pod. So check that out. But yeah, I wanted to say how much I've enjoyed working with you guys. I've stepped away from the show producing full time as of this week, and we've got the lovely and great Katie working behind the scenes, doing a great job, and we'll carry you guys forward. But I mean, what a pleasure it's been to be a part of this thing. I mean, I think the listeners know how great you guys are at what you do. I think you're clearly the best in the Bears beat at what you do. And just being able to be a part of it in a small capacity has been a huge thrill for me, and I'll cherish that forever. And, love you boys as humans. And, hopefully we get to catch up if I'm ever in Chicago, all that kind of stuff. But, man, what a great run it's been. The whole Justin Fields experience, little Mitch Trubisky, the drafting of Caleb. I mean, multiple head coaches. It's been a ride, and it's been one of the great honors of my career working with you boys. So thank you for trusting me to not screw this thing up for all this time.
Well, Kent, we as I said the other day, I mean, we've been blessed with some outstanding producers on the show over the last 10 seasons, but 5 years ago is when we moved to the Athletic. COVID was going on. We, up until that point, had always recorded in person. And that was when, we were forced to go to video because of COVID, but we didn't even know at the time, but I think you knew that that's where we could really take this thing to the next level. So we appreciate everything you've done from that standpoint, because there's no doubt that in the last 5 years, this thing's gone, to a whole new level. And you were an enormous part about that. I would also say, for anybody that might have missed our Ryan Poles interview back in training camp, like that's a perfect example too, because Kent flew up here, set up the cameras in Ryan's office and everything, and it just looked and sounded outstanding.
Yeah, that was a blast. I really enjoyed that. We'll never forget our little run-in Johns with George as we were leaving. Probably keep that what was said there off the air, but it was quite memorable. Man,
everybody's gonna be asking me about it.
Yeah, no, what a great time it's been. And the Johnny Cash bits that we did.
That was all you, man. That was all you.
The Bob, shout out Bob Dabrowski, B-Man. I'll miss you. But I'll be around if the Cowboys play the Bears, or if Mike McCarthy gets hired and starts going wild. I'll be around.
Yeah, we can't thank you enough. Again, if you're literally watching this right now on YouTube, it's all because of Kent. He's the one who convinced us to do this. So, Kent, forever grateful. We know you're not going away. This doesn't feel like a real fully goodbye, because we're still going to bother you as far as I remember.
Yeah,
you're still in that group text. You haven't removed yourself yet.
Well, yeah, I might soon. Actually, just kidding. I'll still be around. Yep, still be doing Cowboy stuff. Still be working with Diana over on Scoop City. So check that out too. And we'll see you down the road.
Kent, you're the best, man. Thank you.
See you, boys.
That's going to do it for us on this episode of Hoge Jahns. It'll do it for the week too. I'm actually going to take a weekend off, believe it or not. Just
get some barbecue, hit us some honky tonks.
Yeah, we're gonna have a good weekend. So we'll be back next week, though, early next week. We'll see where things go over the weekend. See how the results of maybe the Lions will lose on Saturday. Probably not, but
probably not.
Like, if you're the Bears, are you rooting for that, or are you rooting for your top candidate to get more experience in the highest levels of football?
Oof. That's a good question.
I would say the latter.
I mean, I guess the reason for I would say it depends on how confident you feel that his staff is already set up. Because there's a time element there, and if you're worried about that, then I would say, just go ahead and lose.
Yeah. And there's no way of really knowing that, because you can't talk to him.
Right, but maybe that was already
at least on the record.
They did talk last weekend, so maybe that was communicated a little bit. Maybe he has a good idea of his staff being lined up. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the benefits of going to the Super Bowl, whether you win or lose that game, I think are huge. Just to get that experience, to go through it, to understand the league at the highest level. So yeah, we'll see. We do got to run here, though. We will be back early next week, and hope everybody enjoys a good weekend. Just let this thing play out. It's going to take some time, but enjoy the football, and we'll talk to you next week.
See ya.